The drought-stricken Colorado River is in critical condition. Almost 2 years ago, the federal government declared the first ever shortage on the river, triggering cuts to water supplies in the Southwest.
Will the water come from? That's a question Valley cities are now asking after the 7 states along the Colorado River submitted their latest plan to reduce their water allocation.
The Colorado River has always been more than just a river. It has been a lifeline, a source of identity, and a foundation for entire civilizations across the American Southwest and northern Mexico. For thousands of years, its steady flow carved through desert landscapes, created fertile valleys, and offered sustenance to people, plants, and animals. Yet, the unthinkable has finally happened. The Colorado River has dried up. Not a seasonal ebb, not a temporary drought, but a complete disappearance of water along its once mighty channel. This event is not just a natural shift in the landscape, but a cataclysmic turning point with terrifying implications that stretch far beyond the parched banks of the riverbed. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For decades, scientists, farmers, and city planners warned that the relentless demands placed on the river could push it past its limits. The Colorado has been stretched thin by booming populations, sprawling cities, thirsty crops, and a changing climate. Every year, the reservoirs along its path, Lake Powell and Lake Mead most notably, dipped lower and lower, their infamous bathtub rings growing more prominent, marking the absence of billions of gallons of water. The drying of the river, though predicted, always seemed like something far off in the future, a distant crisis that humanity would surely find a way to avoid. But the future has arrived, and with it, a silence where once there was flowing water. The first consequence of the river's disappearance is the collapse of agriculture across a vast region of the continent. The Colorado River has been the lifeblood of the desert breadbasket, feeding millions of acres of farmland in California's Imperial Valley, Arizona, and beyond. Fields of lettuce, alfalfa, and countless other crops depended on its irrigation systems. Without the river, those green expanses turned to dust. Farmers who once shipped produce across the nation now watch as their livelihoods crumble. Supermarkets thousands of miles away begin to feel the shockwaves as prices climb. And suddenly, the absence of the river is not just a regional problem, but a national and even global one. Beyond agriculture, entire cities built in defiance of the desert's natural scarcity find themselves in crisis. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and countless smaller communities thrived on the assumption that the Colorado's water would always be there. Now the faucets sputter and run dry, reservoirs stand empty, and emergency measures fail to keep up with the speed of collapse. Water trucks rumble into neighborhoods like relief convoys, distributing ration supplies to desperate families. The illusion that technology and infrastructure could tame the desert has shattered in an instant. The desert has reclaimed its dominance, and the people who believed they could bend it to their will face a terrifying reckoning. The ecological toll is equally devastating. The Colorado River once carved the Grand Canyon, sustained wetlands, and nourished a stunning array of life. Fish species unique to its waters are gone. Birds that relied on riparian corridors vanish from the skies. Beavers, frogs, and countless other creatures lose their habitats overnight. Without the river, ecosystems unravel, leaving behind barren expanses where once there was resilience and diversity. The silence along the dry riverbed is more than the absence of water. It is the absence of life, a stillness that feels unnatural and haunting. The collapse of hydropower is another chilling consequence. Dams along the Colorado once generated electricity for millions, their turbines spinning thanks to the steady force of rushing water. With reservoirs drained, those turbines sit motionless. Darkness spreads across cities and towns that relied on this energy. Rolling blackouts become permanent outages. Factories grind to a halt. Hospitals struggle to keep emergency generators running. And the very fabric of modern life unravels as the invisible thread of electricity is severed. The loss of power magnifies the suffering caused by the lack of water, turning a crisis into a cascade of disasters. Social order begins to fray under the pressure of scarcity. Water, once taken for granted, becomes the most valuable commodity in the region. Lines form at distribution centers, guarded by armed patrols to prevent riots. Tensions flare between states and communities that once cooperated under water-sharing agreements but now face the stark reality of having nothing left to share. Old rivalries harden into conflicts, and the Southwest becomes a battleground over survival. Families flee parched towns in caravans, creating waves of climate refugees who overwhelm neighboring regions unprepared for their arrival. The disappearance of the river sets off a migration not seen in modern American history. The psychological impact cannot be understated. Generations grew up with the Colorado River as a symbol of endurance and majesty, a constant presence threading through deserts and canyons. To see it vanish is to witness the impossible, to feel the ground of certainty give way beneath one's feet. Communities that celebrated their connection to the river through festivals, stories, and traditions now mourn as though for a lost loved one. The cultural trauma runs deep, as if a piece of identity itself has been ripped away. The people of the Southwest no longer live with the river but with its ghost, a dry scar across the land that mocks their dependence and their hubris. The drying of the Colorado River also lays bare the fragility of modern civilization in the face of natural limits. For centuries, humans have built empires on the belief that resources were infinite or at least endlessly adaptable to human needs. The sudden collapse of a river that sustained 40 million people demonstrates how thin that illusion was. It forces an uncomfortable realization. The systems that underpin daily life, food, water, power, stability, are not unbreakable. They are contingent on natural processes that cannot be bent forever. The Colorado River's disappearance is a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting not just the loss of a river, but the vulnerability of an entire way of life. In the absence of water, the land itself transforms in terrifying ways. Once lush fields become dust bowls. Winds pick up the dry soil, carrying it across states in choking storms that blot out the sun. Air quality plummets, respiratory illnesses surge, and visibility shrinks to nothing in the face of these suffocating clouds. The dry riverbed becomes a highway for invasive plants and pests that thrive in the chaos left behind. The landscape reshapes itself into something unrecognizable, an alien desert sculpted not by time but by sudden collapse. Economic consequences ripple outward with equal ferocity. Tourism that once drew millions to the beauty of the river and its reservoirs collapses. Towns built on recreation, from boating to fishing, become ghost towns. Industries that relied on steady water supplies shut their doors. Jobs vanish, markets destabilize, and financial systems strain under the weight of mass unemployment. The drying of the river is not just an environmental disaster, but a financial one, collapsing pillars of prosperity and leaving behind ruin. The geopolitical implications extend beyond the United States. The Colorado River does not stop at the border. It has historically provided water to Mexico as well. With nothing left to give, international tensions rise. Communities in northern Mexico, already accustomed to scarcity, now face total deprivation. Diplomatic relations strain under the weight of impossible demands. The drying of the river becomes not just a regional crisis, but a source of international instability, reshaping relationships and fueling disputes across borders. This catastrophe also underscores the terrifying unpredictability of climate. The forces that led to the river's disappearance, rising temperatures, shrinking snowpacks, prolonged droughts, are not isolated to one watershed. They are part of a global pattern of instability. The Colorado River's collapse is a warning flare, a signal that no system, no matter how large or storied, is immune to the relentless pressures of climate change. The implications are terrifying because they suggest that other great rivers, other vital lifelines could be next. The Colorado is not an isolated tragedy, but a preview of what awaits if humanity fails to reckon with its relationship to the natural world. The sheer finality of the event is what makes it so terrifying. Droughts can end, reservoirs can refill. But when a river dries up completely, when the channel itself cracks and crumbles, there is no easy path back. Centuries of natural processes that carved the flow cannot be reversed by human engineering in a matter of months or even years. The disappearance of the Colorado River is not a temporary inconvenience, but an epochal shift, a rewriting of the geography and destiny of an entire region. What emerges from this disaster is a haunting portrait of dependency and collapse. The Colorado River was asked to sustain too much for too long under too many pressures. Its absence reveals the cost of that overreach in stark and terrifying detail. Fields of dust, cities on the brink, ecosystems in collapse, societies in turmoil, all are now bound to the same silence where once the river ran. The terrifying reality is that the river did not just dry up, it took with it the stability of an entire civilization that had forgotten how fragile it really was. The silence along the Colorado River's empty channel is not just an absence of water, but an active force that reshapes everything it touches. In the first moments of the river's disappearance, the land seemed to simply hold its breath. But as days passed, that silence began to breed consequences no one could have fully anticipated. The absence of flow alters temperature gradients across the desert floor, turning already scorching summers into infernos. Without the cooling presence of running water, heat radiates unchecked from canyon walls, blistering the earth and pushing local climates into extremes that exceed recorded history. In regions where daily highs were already punishing, the thermometer climbs into realms unfit for human or animal survival. Asphalt buckles, steel warps, and power lines sag under the weight of relentless heat. The Colorado River's disappearance is not a passive vanishing, but an accelerant for a climate spiral that grows more violent by the hour. One of the most terrifying aspects of the river's drying is the transformation of the Grand Canyon itself. For millions of years, the Colorado sculpted this vast chasm, cutting deeper with each passing century, shaping sheer cliffs, alcoves, and spires. Now, with no water coursing through it, the canyon stands as a hollow monument to absence. The once glistening currents at the bottom are replaced by cracked earth and wind-blown sand. Tourists who once gazed down to see a ribbon of life threading through the stone are met instead with a lifeless scar. The canyon echoes differently without the rush of water. Voices bounce hollowly off its walls, a reminder that even the greatest wonders of the world can be stripped of their essence. Guides who built their livelihoods around rafting expeditions are left jobless, their rafts deflated in storage sheds, relics of a vanished age. The Grand Canyon is no longer a living system but a mausoleum, preserving memory rather than sustaining life. The river's drying also awakens dangers buried for decades beneath its waters. As reservoirs recede completely, their hidden secrets emerge. Shipwrecks, forgotten towns, and even long-submerged toxic sites are exposed to the air. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, once sprawling reservoirs, now reveal jagged shorelines and skeletal remains of drowned forests. Even more alarming are the chemical residues long buried in silt, pesticides, heavy metals, industrial runoff that dry out, turn to dust, and scatter into surrounding communities on the wind. People inhale particles carrying the remnants of humanity's past carelessness, poisoning lungs and soils alike. The river, once a conveyor of life, has now become the source of toxins that infiltrate bodies quietly, invisibly, inescapably. The indigenous nations of the Colorado River Basin face a unique kind of devastation. For centuries before dams and cities laid claim to its waters, the river was sacred, woven into creation stories and spiritual practices. Its songs and currents carried meaning far deeper than mere utility. Now, with its disappearance, these communities endure not just material loss, but cultural and spiritual rupture. Ceremonies once performed by the riverbank can no longer be enacted in their traditional form. Sacred places tied to the flow are reduced to dust, breaking connections to ancestors who lived in harmony with the river's cycles. For these communities, the drying of the Colorado is not only a disaster of survival, but a profound spiritual trauma, as if an entire worldview has been severed at its root. Economic collapse deepens as insurance companies declare entire swaths of the Southwest uninsurable. With no water, farming is gone, infrastructure crumbles, and property values plummet to zero. Homeowners find themselves trapped in houses that cannot be sold, in towns where businesses close in rapid succession. Banks collapse under the weight of unpaid mortgages, while state governments stagger under the burden of mass unemployment and emergency aid. Wall Street, long insulated from environmental catastrophes by distance, is pulled into the spiral as market instability spreads. What began as a river's disappearance morphs into a financial storm capable of rattling global economies. The absence of a single river demonstrates how interconnected the world systems truly are, reminding everyone that geography offers no immunity from collapse. Food security, always tenuous in arid regions, shatters under the weight of this loss. Beyond vegetables and fruits grown in irrigated fields, The disappearance of alfalfa production has consequences across the globe. Alfalfa, grown in massive quantities with Colorado River water, sustained livestock industries far beyond the Southwest. Without it, meat and dairy prices surge worldwide, sparking unrest in countries already grappling with inflation and shortages. Grocery shelves across continents reflect the absence of one river thousands of miles away, proof that the global food web is only as strong as its most fragile strand. Parents stand in markets staring at prices that triple overnight, realizing that the river's absence reaches into their kitchens no matter how far they live from its bed. As the land withers, so too does political stability. Local governments, overwhelmed by the scale of disaster, declare states of emergency one after another. State lines harden into zones of conflict as governors deploy National Guard units, not against foreign enemies, but against neighboring states competing for dwindling water deliveries from underground aquifers. Federal authorities, unable to enforce water compacts that depended on the existence of the river itself, struggle to prevent open clashes between armed groups. In some rural areas, militias form to seize and defend wells, creating patchwork kingdoms of control where survival depends on allegiance. The American Southwest, once united by shared reliance on the river, fractures under the stress of its disappearance, demonstrating how fragile national unity can be when tested by resource collapse. The cultural icons tied to the river vanish as well. Movies, songs, and novels that once celebrated rafting trips, desert adventures, and the beauty of the Colorado now read like elegies to a lost world. Artists who drew inspiration from its currents confront a creative void. Painters who once tried to capture the ever-changing blues and greens of the river now face only shades of brown and gray. The cultural imagination, once sustained by the river's dynamism, falls silent in the same way its waters have. An entire dimension of American identity, shaped by the myth of conquering deserts and taming rivers, crumbles under the weight of failure. The river's disappearance also creates new health crises beyond dehydration and famine. Without flowing water, mosquitoes and other disease vectors multiply in stagnant pools left behind. Malaria and West Nile virus spread where they were once rare. Dust storms laden with toxic silt drive up rates of asthma and cancer. Hospitals, already strained by lack of electricity and resources, struggle to keep pace with the wave of illnesses. Communities that once thrived along the river become hot zones of disease, further accelerating the abandonment of entire regions. Refugees who flee northward carry these illnesses with them, seeding new outbreaks in places unprepared for their arrival. The absence of the river thus gives birth to plagues that ripple outward in terrifying waves. International observers watch the crisis unfold with both fear and calculation. Global powers note how quickly the United States is destabilized by the disappearance of one river. Rivals see opportunities in the distraction, testing boundaries abroad while America struggles to contain chaos at home. Allies question the reliability of a nation unable to sustain its own heartland. The Colorado River's absence weakens not just the Southwest, but the geopolitical standing of an entire country, shifting balances of power in ways few could have imagined. In boardrooms and embassies, the drying river becomes a case study in vulnerability, a reminder that even great powers can be undone by the collapse of natural systems. Meanwhile, nature reclaims what humanity once controlled. Canyon walls that were tamed by dams and diverted flows now crumble under unrestrained erosion. Without water to hold soils together, landslides increase, burying roads and towns under tons of shifting rock. The river delta, once revived periodically by managed releases of water, collapses into a wasteland, its wetlands reduced to salt flats. Coyotes, rattlesnakes, and scorpions thrive in the desolation, while larger mammals vanish. The land is not empty, it is transformed, reverting to a harsher, older identity in which only the most adaptable creatures can survive. Humanity, ironically, proves less adaptable than many of the desert's native species. The drying of the Colorado also alters the psychological geography of America. For generations, the West represented promise and expansion, a frontier spirit tied to rivers and skies. The absence of the Colorado punctures that mythology. No longer a place of hope, the West becomes a cautionary tale, a warning etched in dust. Children grow up with stories not of pioneers carving lives in the desert, but of mass flight from uninhabitable lands. School books that once described the Colorado as a mighty river must be rewritten to describe it as a ghost. a foundational story of the nation itself is erased, leaving behind a cultural vacuum as unsettling as the physical one. Space itself takes on an eerie new quality in the absence of the river. Towns once connected by flowing water feel isolated, marooned in a sea of dust. Highways stretch across wastelands devoid of the subtle green corridors that the river nourished. The visual landscape changes in ways that feel apocalyptic. Where once there were glimmers of blue reflecting the sun, now there is only glare from endless stretches of cracked mud. The river, even in dry times, once anchored orientation, a constant presence guiding movement and settlement. Its absence leaves not just a physical void, but a disorientation of space, as if maps themselves have been torn and rendered useless. The most chilling reality is that this transformation, though shocking, is permanent in human terms. The processes that carved the river took eons, and no amount of engineering can replicate that timescale. Attempts to pump water in from other basins collapse under logistical and political impossibility. Dreams of desalination plants fail to materialize on the scale required. For the first time in centuries, people must confront a reality where no rescue is possible, where the river that once defied deserts has finally been claimed by them. This permanence is perhaps the most terrifying implication, for it forces acceptance of a future defined not by resilience, but by irrevocable loss. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Colorado River drying up and potential terrifying consequences? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.